assassinated. So let's talk about his foreign policy. At the beginning or early on in his term, he focuses on the Soviet relationship between the United States. His his foreign policy is called flexible response. He wanted to triple our nuclear capabilities, increase troops that we had, ships, artillery, and he also creates a group of special forces known as the Green Berets that you can see there. So we got to talk a little bit about Cuba. Kennedy has two issues or problems with Cuba. Keep in mind, Cuba is about 90 miles from the United States. From the Florida Keys, actually. It's very, very close. You can actually float on a boat from Cuba to the United States relatively easily. There have been Cubans that have floated on inner tubes to get to the United States and have done so successfully. There have been some that have died trying to do that. It just depends on the storms and what's happening. Fidel Castro starts a Cuban revolution. The guy that you see there that I hate, that is Batista. That was the president of Cuba before Cuba became communist. He starts a revolution, and the dictator, and he wasn't a good guy. Batista was very controlling, and there was a lot of poverty in Cuba, which is why Castro was able to take over. Batista flees. He comes to the United States, and we protect him. And Castro wants to turn Cuba to communism. He welcomes aid from the Soviet Union and gets help on setting up a communist nation in Cuba, which again is a little nerve-wracking for us because they're only 90 miles away. If you note there, he's a harsh dictator. He suspends elections. He jailed or executed opponents. He censored the press and the media. Not a good guy. So when Kennedy takes office, he finds out that Eisenhower had actually given the CIA permission to train Cuban exiles to invade Cuba. It's called the Bay of Pigs invasion. Unfortunately, it fails. 9 days after Kennedy takes office, this Bay of Pigs invasion is launched, and like it says on the PowerPoint, 1,200 Cuban exiles met 25,000 Cuban troops that were backed by Soviet tanks, and they're easily defeated. And Castro quickly realizes that it was the United States that did this. It was very evident, their weapons, what they had, who dropped them off. They noted that. They realized it was the U.S. And this is where our relationship with them is pretty much broken. So we have to go into, we're going to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Again, there's a time period between this. These don't happen back to back. It doesn't happen overnight. There's some space between these two things, between Kennedy taking office and later on. So in 61, the United States had built, and this is kind of a little known fact about the Cuban Missile Crisis. We oftentimes focus on Cuba and the Soviet Union and forget to look at what was our role in this. So the United States in 61, think back to the Truman Doctrine. True men eat greasy turkey. We gave aid to Greece and Turkey so that they would not fall to communism. We ended up, because of that relationship, we ended up being allowed to put missiles in Turkey so that we could launch them from Turkey to the Soviet Union and kind of keep them in check in case anything ever happened. Soviet Union wasn't really happy about that. Khrushchev thought that, okay, since they did this, Khrushchev, this is the leader of the Soviet Union after Stalin dies. Khrushchev believed that, okay, we can build missiles in Cuba and then they'll be pointed at the United States and, it'll be in check. That was in his mindset. He didn't realize or didn't think that this would, set off such a reaction from the U.S. So in 62, our spy planes, yes, I said our spy planes, realized that there were missile sites in Cuba that were 90 miles from the United States, and Kennedy orders them removed. He puts in a naval blockade to stop them from getting more supplies to continue building these. You can see here this kind of faint circle that outlines, this is the range of the missiles. So they could have attacked, a significant number of cities along the East Coast, as well as, really he could have hit here if you look at that range. Where are we at? Let's see. This is North Carolina here. So we're what, right in here? Where that juts out. Beep, beep, beep. I can't say it. Beep. Somewhere in there. I'm bad at this. You can tell. I need some state outlines, don't I? That's all right. No worries. So anyways, Kennedy responds. He says, look, we will not tolerate weapons in Cuba. He actually says, look, we will retaliate with our nuclear weapons if the Soviet Union does not remove these. So for 13 days, there's this limbo that takes place. Are we going to sink the Soviet ships? Is this going to start a war? Are we going to, under a nuclear threat? People were talking about moving away from the coast, getting out of the range of these missiles. You can see there people warning him to be careful, peace or perish. He addresses the nation, does provide some ease, but Americans were still on edge about this. And then finally, they are able to make a deal. This is the closest that we ever got to nuclear war. It does establish the hotline system. If you've ever seen the red phones in the presidential office, like in a movie, that's what the hotline is. It's a direct line to the Kremlin, the Soviet government or Russian government, so that the leader can talk directly with the leader of the United States can speak directly with the leader of Russia or Soviet Union back then. And then also they pass a limited test ban treaty where you could not test in the atmosphere the nuclear missiles that you have. There's a great movie series, or I'm going to say it's not a movie series. It's a, they took like graphic novel animators, I guess is the best word to put it, and they created a B. Castro, B. Kennedy, B. Khrushchev, series where they look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, but they look at like what influences these three leaders like coming into the Cuban Missile Crisis. What are they thinking about? What is their background? What was their experience with war? And how does that impact the decisions that they make? It's really, really good, and they're really short. So I encourage you, go look those up. The group that made them is called Approaching the Apocalypse. And like I said, there's like 10 different videos, but these are about 3 to 5 minutes apiece. B. Castro, B. Kennedy, B. Khrushchev is what you need to look up to get to those. All right, so let's talk for a little bit about Berlin. Berlin, after World War II, about 80% of the city had been destroyed just from the bombing to try to get the Nazis to surrender. And a lot of people think that the Berlin Wall was actually built right after World War II when the Soviet Union takes over, like around the time of the Berlin airlift. And that's actually not true. It was built later on in the 60s when Kennedy was president. So Berlin in 61 is in turmoil. You've got a lot of people fleeing from one side to the other. West Berlin was free, East Berlin was not. And so a lot of people were leaving East Berlin to get to West Berlin, and the Soviet Union wanted to stop that. So they will develop a wall, the Berlin Wall, that will become a symbol of communism and oppression until the fall or collapse of communism in 1991 is when it fell, but 89 is when they removed the wall. So they start building the wall at midnight. A lot of people think, well, why didn't they just like jump over it? Well, you couldn't. They would put guards every so many feet to try to stop people from going from one side to the other. And you'll see here in some of these pictures, I'm going to try to move quickly. There's a lot of pictures here. You can pause it and look. I know they're smiling, but not, again, not funny. You can see people here escaping. The house front eventually in some areas will become part of the wall. Here's what it looked like. You've got guard towers in the center. If you're caught in the center, they will shoot you on sight. Here's a picture of a German soldier, East German soldier, helping a boy cross. The guard actually is caught and he's punished, which we assume means death because they're pretty harsh. Here you can see they're putting their baby over the wall to somebody to raise. I doubt they got over themselves. Here you can see people escaping out windows to the other side. Grandparents and I'm assuming grandkids. So you can see here, notice the pipeline on the left side. That's so that you can't put your hand all the way up over the top and get over. Anybody found in that center area would be shot on sight. No warning, they just shoot you. So Kennedy's got to make a decision. How is he going to respond to this? What is he going to do? Is he going to leave West Berlin? Because that's the pressure. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to stop the United States from having a presence in West Berlin. And so he goes to Germany, he goes to Berlin, and he gives a famous speech. Actually, Jackie Kennedy was fluent in German and got up and addressed the people in their own language. They loved her. They went crazy when she did that. And then Kennedy gets up and he gives a speech in English because he doesn't speak German. But one of the most famous lines from the speech is Ich bin ein Berliner, which means I am a Berliner. And like we as the United States stand with you. We recognize what your struggle is and we're not leaving you. We're not abandoning the city is what he is saying. The wall will stand guarded until 1989. And then eventually the two will join together and you'll have a united Germany. Your lifetime, you guys are too young. You don't remember this. I vaguely remember. I was born in 83. I can remember watching one Olympics, a Winter Olympics, where I can recall, actually no, two, where I can recall East Germany competing. There were some German swimmers. I can't remember if they were united by then or not. Some German female swimmers that were taking like steroids and like beat the brakes off of everybody because they were competing with steroids, and that's something I recall. Anyways, neither here nor there, whatever. Fun fact. Per usual, there's Kennedy speaking. Here's what the city looks like. I'm not going to go over this. Pause it and read it if you want to look. It's interesting. They did not build very much after World War II, and it shows you how there's not much there that's built up. So let's talk about the assassination. Kennedy and his wife, JFK and Jackie, traveled to Texas, to Dallas, actually, to give some political appearances, make some speeches. And while he is in a parade, he's actually shot in the head. He's pronounced dead when he arrives at the hospital. Of course, LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, becomes the president after this. Lee Harvey Oswald is who is credited for killing Kennedy. He had served, I know it says severed, sorry, it shouldn't, served a little more than 1,000 days in office. If you are interested in the Kennedy assassination, there are a slew of books out there. Probably the best movie that centers around a